Oh, look, I heard a little feedback when you were talking to me, Ben. Is that me or?
What's that?
I thought I heard a little feedback. Okay, it may be okay.
Oh, no, it wasn't me. It was not intentionally.
Okay.
We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore, and I would like to welcome you to the September 9th, 2024 Planning and Economic Development Committee remote meeting. All committee members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. And we are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. And we also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. And for those of you out there with us today, we'd like to welcome you. And for today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. At that time, your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. And at this point, if you'd like to speak, please, you need to push *3 to enter into the speakers queue. And at this time, I'd like to go through and introduce all committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Council and staff, as I say your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hi, everyone.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good afternoon.
Transportation Assistant Director Jessica Morris.
Hello.
Urban Planner 2 Haley Burton.
Hey, everyone.
Assistant City Attorney Taylor Morris.
Hey, everybody.
Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley.
Good afternoon.
And Lucy Crown, Transportation Planning Manager.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. And at this time, we'd like to call to order the meeting. And the first thing on the agenda today would be the approval of the minutes, August 12th, 2024. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Great, I got a motion and a second. At this time, I'd like to do a roll call. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
And Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Hi.
And myself, aye, and that motion passes. The second item on our agenda will be the Business Improvement District implementation. Ben Woody, the Assistant Manager, will be doing the presentation. And this will be updates on the engagement and resulting services priority, along with approach and timelines for the RFP process to contract with the service provider. This presentation will be for information only.
Thank you, Chair Kilgore. Again, Ben Woody, Assistant City Manager. I'm glad to be here today. And as you mentioned, I'm going to do a quick review of our efforts on the implementation of the Downtown Business Improvement District. Katie, if you can go to the next slide, please. So we'll kind of jump right in with key takeaways. As council is aware, in June, you did establish a business improvement district, also known as a municipal service district for our downtown area. That included a tax rate of 0.0877 per 100, generating an annual budget for the bid of $1.25 million. So the actual tax has been assessed and the boundary is in place, so the bid does exist. So the next step that the city is undertaking is we're going to put out an RFP and hopefully contract with a service provider who is able to deliver those supplemental services that were identified and the operational plan that accompanied the bid, as well as a council resolution the council also adopted as part of the bid approval back in June. The RFP process by statute, since we are contracting with a service provider, we are required to do an RFP. We're also required as part of that process to do additional public engagement, which the staff has spent the past 2 months doing. What I'll do today is give you an overview of that public engagement, which really was intended to identify the greatest needs and priorities for the downtown bid. And then I'll also, as we get into the presentation, talk about some of the tasks or some of the things that we're asking the service provider to do as part of the RFP response. And ultimately, just as a reminder to those that are watching, I know City Council knows this, but City Council does maintain the authority over the annual bid budget, and also City Council sets the yearly tax rate. Next slide, please. So as I get into this, I'll just pause for a second. As I get into this, we don't have a whole lot of slides, but for council members, please feel free to stop me if you have any questions. I'm happy to kind of discuss items along the way if that's easiest for council. Where we started at with the bid is the objectives. These are I'm not going to read these to you, but these are the 4 bid objectives that were included in the resolution that City Council adopted. And so as city staff, as we went through the engagement process, and we are beginning the drafting of the RFP, and I'll show you a schedule later in the presentation for next steps. But as we've done that, we have really tried to to follow these bid objectives that were set by City Council, and we've actually used those as guiding principles throughout the past 2 months. Next slide, please. So for those that are more visual, this is kind of a timeline of where we're at in terms of this process. Again, council authorized the bid in June. City staff spent the months of July and August doing supplemental public engagement. We are in the process now of drafting the RFP. Our intention is to release or issue the RFP in September 20th. There'll be a process between September really through November where the city will receive responses to the RFP, do an evaluation. We're going to talk a little more about that later in the presentation. We hope to be back in front of council in November with a contract. One thing I'll note is that because of the dollar amount of the services, City Council is required to approve the contract for the service provider in a public meeting. So that'll be an opportunity for council to see the contract as well as the community to provide feedback. We hope to finalize the contract in November, December, and then we want to have a service provider operational in January. That's really important because by statute, we have to have at least portions of bid services in place by June 30th. So we have a hard deadline of June 30th to have I wouldn't say that all the bid has to be functional, but we have to have it up and running by June 30th. So there certainly is a timeline that we need to meet to stay on track with this process. Next slide, please. So this is the engagement summary, or excuse me, go ahead, Councilwoman Ullman.
Yeah, just in the spirit of kind of going through informally, could you go back to the timeline?
Yep.
So the way I'm internalizing that is we'd get the update by the end of the fiscal year. And that's our requirement. But we don't have a real directive date of when we expect boots on the ground of people really delivering this. Is that because we really need not applicants, but the people applying to give us a vision of that? Because what I'd say is I definitely do not want to be at June 31st. And that's the first time our citizens who really came to us asking for this see an impact. I very much would hope that this becomes operationalized pretty quickly within early Q1. So could you talk to me about our expectations for that of when boots will actually hit the ground?
And I think spring is something we want to shoot for. We do have a little more written detailed timeline a little later in the presentation, but I think what the challenges are is that they're going to have to, the entity, the service provider is going to have to hire people. They're going to have to bring employees on board. They may do some subcontracting. They've got to purchase equipment. So there's definitely going to be some startup time for them. And I think some of that, when we put the RFP out, we're going to ask for them to give us a schedule of their ability to deliver that. So I think we'll put some of that onus back on the potential service providers to demonstrate to the city that they can get boots on the ground in advance of June 30th. So yeah, some of that's going to be what the proposals look like as well. But we understand the need to get this off the ground and be successful.
And I think part of the impetus that we see later in the objectives of this is to have a nimble source that can really respond. And so like this timeline definitely seems like if we were asking our already overstrapped staff to deliver something, but my hope is that they'll be able to really hit the ground running as a more nimble, flexible partner. Okay, I know I jumped the gun on a detailed slide later, but thanks for letting me kind of ask that question now.
Good question, important. We're also going to show you a scoring matrix, which what you'll see on that. One of the items that we're going to value is, again, their ability to show us that they can implement these bid services. So we'll get into more of that. That's a good question. Next slide, please. This is the engagement summary. So the engagement consisted of 10 focus groups. So we thought one way to go out was to meet with individual focus groups. That those included entities like downtown residents, members of the experiencing homelessness, the Asheville Downtown Association, property owners. So we tried to have a good mix of different focus groups. We had one internal operations department focus group, even the people on the city side. So we had 10 focus groups. We also had a survey that was put out, had good response to that. And these are really, there's a full engagement report that's posted on the public input page, the project page. So you can deep dive in all the feedback we got through the focus groups from the survey. But we put this slide together really just to be in kind of a higher level summary to cover as part of the presentation. So I do want to hit these kind of insights. These are the things that really rose to the top, and we saw consensus amongst the different focus groups in the survey. So these are things that kind of rose up as most important. Of course, transparency and accountability regarding how the bid operates. Probably the number one priority of most groups, not all, but most, was enhanced safety and cleanliness. I think the safety piece in particular is something people want to see a focus on initially. A key part of that safety is the concept of community stewards. We've actually got a separate slide that's going to do more of a deep dive on that. That probably generated the most discussion in terms of the engagement we did. The general perception is that the concept of community supported, their stewards, is supported. I think what the community wants to see, though, and I think a lot of this is actually in the council resolution that was adopted, but they want to see stewards really be supportive for all of the community to fill a kind of an engagement role, as well as providing assistance, but also being clear that these community stewards, they're not law enforcement, they're not security. They were never proposed to be that way, but just want to be real clear of the role these stewards will play. And of course, there's been a lot of discussion on making sure these individuals have proper training. And again, a lot of that was in the council resolution, but we've kind of heard elements of that reinforced throughout the engagement. People want to see cleaning. One thing that really we heard a lot of is more cleaning of public restrooms and more access to restrooms, litter removal, needle disposal. And again, I think where the bid can really enhance city services is its ability to be nimble and to respond to really quickly or to kind of on-demand cleaning issues. So we see that as a place where the bid brings a lot of value. Participants generally want to see more support for people that are experiencing homeless. That includes mental health and wraparound services. And, again, the community stewards are in a good position to perhaps, as boots on the ground, connect people to those wraparound services. And then finally, we also heard about the bid's ability to support enhanced landscaping, beautification, activation and programming of spaces. I do think that safety and cleanliness right now are the higher priority, but I think these are areas that there still is an interest from our community in the coming years. Any questions on the engagement summary? Okay, next slide, Katie. Again, more information on our project page for that. So what that looks like is we begin to develop what I think the scope of services will be. This is based on information from the council resolution as well as the engagement process we just went through. So I think there's 3 key service areas for the service provider to focus on: safety and hospitality, cleanliness, and special projects. And we really ordered those in the way that we heard back from the community. I'm not going to read all this in detail, but you can get a feel for the types of things that each scope area would have a service provider focus on. Councilwoman Ullman, questions or conversation?
Always. We've heard a lot of conversation about the community stewards and that the intention is to hire some people to deliver this specific function. Do we have a sense of anticipating if the bid service provider would hire people for the cleanliness function, or if that would be contracted out? I know that there's a line, right, with it being an RFP and a service provider providing it, but there's a lot that, and I went through the real detailed responses to the survey, and there's a lot of people who really want to see like pressure washing and getting gum off the sidewalks and making sure the garbage receptacles are super clean, that I'm wondering, and that a steward's job description and a job description for the services and those cleaning functions, those probably aren't the same person. Do we have a sense of how that might come to be, if it will be dedicated staff for one and contractors for another, or just have you learned anything more through your discovery process this summer to shed light?
So I'll say that that's a great question, actually. So one, in the scope of, or the RFP, excuse me, in terms of the responses, we are going to ask that any respondents clarify that. So we want to know, like, what services are they going to subcontract versus what services would they just provide? So we are asking, we want to understand that, because, you know, that's a good question. Is the community steward, are they the same person that, I don't know that they are the same person necessarily, because there may be some different skill sets. Am I just kind of looking at other North Carolina cities? Most places actually do a combination. It seems like most cities tend to have some old staff, you know, some staff level people that do certain things, maybe more of the marketing and engagement, but they tend to contract out for like the cleanliness services, or, you know, maybe the ambassador type services. So it seems to be a mix. I've even seen in Raleigh where they actually, not suggesting this in Asheville, but Raleigh actually, the bid uses a portion of the funds to give back to the city to do certain extra things. So it's really any way we want to do it. But I think we'll put some of the onus on the service providers to help us understand how they're going to do it and how that's going to equal successful implementation.
That's really helpful. Part of what, you know, I've been continuing to have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people in the community about this. And like, one of the questions I've had in critique/concerns is like this sentiment of Disneyfication, Disneyifying downtown, in a very clever play on words. But this idea of like, this is our downtown. I don't want some person with a, you know, yellow vest harassing me, asking me all the time, do I need directions? Like, do we need full-time people to be greeters or to be a community steward? And like, I don't know if I have the answer to that, but then my head went, well, like, okay, well, you know, we have a lot of positions at the city where they're kind of like a generalized maintenance person. And is that an overlapping skill set to be a steward and to be on call when you need extra pressure washing? I don't really know, but I hope that as we're in the RFP, we can start discerning that so that we don't overstaff a function and understaff or overcontract, but just what is that balance? Seeing a lot of the survey responses, it also seems like having on-call support, evening hour support from community stewards, that's a different time of day But do we need 24-hour round-the-clock community stewards? I don't know that we do. So hopefully the RFP can reflect kind of the need as opposed to what had started a long time ago in the bid conversation and has evolved over time. Thanks.
That's good questions. And like looking at some other RFPs, I don't think typically that bids are, I'm not aware of a lot of them that do 24/7 coverage. They usually have, I've seen RFPs where there's, the hours vary based on the service. I mean, it may be that, the folks that are just doing cleanliness may stop at a certain time that makes sense of the day. And there might be more of a just purely community steward role that functions later in the evenings, perhaps. So we'll try to get as much of that detail as we can, Councilman Ullman, in the responses. Councilman Turner, did you have a comment or a question?
Well, I was going to speak up. Maggie, I think this is a great point you're bringing up. And, it seems that if the contracts are twice removed, there's less flexibility in that first year to adapt, or maybe there is, maybe there's not. But expressing that desire might be helpful somehow. It is going to be nimble and changing, but I would hate to see us get in like a 12-month contract, then it not, like Maggie said, be overstaffed, or maybe it's not well received in the community, or who knows, but will it be nimble? It reminds me of like RadTip Dev or whatever the transit. Like we can't really ever make changes. It's like this annual contract instead of service changes. You know what I mean? So I'd be curious to see how we could flush out. And I think it will be helpful if if it's defined what will be subcontracted out. But it's curious because I would love to see kind of a lot of ownership from the main contract in this first round.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And Ben, I'm sorry, I'm actually in a car driving and I'm keeping my camera off, but I will be able to follow along, just FYI, everyone.
That's fine, Councilwoman Turner. And you saw a lot of this two Fridays ago at Downtown Commission.
I did, and I'll share with the rest of the committee right now while I have the microphone that it was really well received at Downtown Commission, and Downtown Commission put in a lot of time and effort and meetings and kind of feedback. There were some, harsh comments and questions made early on, and would it be security, and all these things came up, and I feel like the RFP really addressed their concerns, made explicit, what they were asking about, and it was received really well and supported.
Yeah, we've got a slide on that coming up. And I'll say that I should have said this. The Downtown Commission formed a working group that also helped the staff with some of the engagement efforts. So I should give some credit to 3 of those Downtown Commission members because they actually were a part of the engagement process we went through. Community stewards, a couple of things that have come out of our conversations is I think training is very important. The first bullet point, actually the first 2 bullet points were items that were in the council resolution in June, and those have proven to be very important and very much supported in the community. So I think everybody agrees that the community steward role is going to need to have appropriate training. The other thing that I think we have discovered in conversations that we also want to make sure that those community stewards and the service provider are having regular training and interactions from city departments or even county departments. So we want to make sure that there's a relationship with APD, with our community responders, with the community paramedics. So again, just want to make sure the community stewards and that role is clear and that it meets a need that exists in downtown. A couple of things I want to, again, never propose, but I just want to say it to be clear. Community stewards are not security. They are not law enforcement, and they will not carry weapons, and that will be in the RFP. What they are, though, is a visible presence. They can be proactive. They can engage. They know how to not necessarily how to connect people with our resources, like I just mentioned, community responders and community paramedics. They can do the typical ambassador type of role where they can provide directions or just provide a safety walk or assistance as needed. And then finally, one of the things we want to do is make sure that they understand and are able to report issues or concerns to agencies or bid contractors. So again, that's part of that training. So if there's a stormwater drain that's not functioning or clogged, I would hope that our community stewards would be able to contact our public works department, for example, and make them aware of that need for a drainage issue to be addressed. Any questions on the stewards before we move to the next slide? Next slide, Katie. Transparency and governance was something that came up real quick. I mentioned there's a public hearing required for the contract authorization. There are certain statutory required budgeting and reporting requirements they have to do. There's always going to be an annual cost proposal, so we will all know what the provider is proposing to spend money on, including whether they're subcontracting for things. That'll be publicly available. And of course, City Council will always maintain approval or the ability to modify the annual bid budget. So there's some financial oversight from City Council. The other thing that City Council established is this concept of a steering committee. And the way this works is that the selected service provider will establish a steering committee. And if you'll go to the next slide, Katie, that steering committee has a very specific composition. So when the service provider receives the contract, successful applicant, they will then have to create this steering committee to oversee their work. It has a specific composition, a specific industry representation, and a specific geographic representation. And the service provider will have to put forward a slate of candidates, a steering committee that then has to be approved by City Council. If City Council does not like that slate or has a concern with it, then the service provider would have to put forward a new slate, and that continues until City Council approves it. So again, this is just another layer of oversight that exists and has community representation. Councilwoman Altman.
And if I recall the timeline, am I reading this right, that RFP goes out, service providers propose, city staff makes a decision, council awards a contract, then is the process to seat the steering committee? So it's not like
Correct.
the steering committee won't be decided at time of contract.
Correct. And I don't think that's practical, or I just don't think that's achievable at that point for that service provider. But once they have the contract, then yes, in the contract language itself, we will have a specific provision that requires them to have the steering committee in place by a certain time frame. So we'll be real clear on that.
Thanks.
Councilwoman Turner.
So maybe I heard something different when we were at the Downtown Commission. I didn't realize, and let me make sure I even heard you right. So a slate will come to us from the steering committee, but if we don't like one member or three members of the slate, it will go back for a new slate recommendation rather than us just saying, you know, this is great, but we saw these other two applicants and we'd like to make sure they're on board. Like it's going to have to volley back and forth until an actual slate is approved.
Yeah, I mean, city council, you're not making individual appointments. The provider is going to bring you a steering committee that meets this. So yes, if let's just say, for example, council had, I don't know why you would, I'm sure it'll be a great slate, but let's just say you had let's say the at-large representative was problematic for whatever reason. At that point, you would not approve the slate, and I would think the city council would say why they're not approving the slate. Then it would be incumbent upon the service provider to bring back a revised steering committee membership that meets city council's objectives and can be approved.
I guess what I thought was happening is that we would be able to see all applications and make out loud commentary that we would like to see certain members or not this back and forth. I'm not sure when that changed. Am I the only one that understood it that way?
I'd have to go back and read what is in our resolution. But what I recall is that we're requiring the service provider to have all applicants be public. So as soon as they open up the application period, anyone would be able to see who's applying, and that all of that would be public. And then that first group would come to us. And then I think the distinction I'm hearing is like do we go one at a time for every proposed individual and vote yay or nay? And what I'm hearing Ben say is we don't necessarily say so-and-so approved, so-and-so approved. It's that the service provider brings us a slate or a group, and then we deliberate on that group. And if we're not unanimous on all the people, then we would go back to the service provider and say, hey, this doesn't look like the full list that we're ready to sign up for.
Interesting. Okay. It's not quite how I remembered it, but here we are. Thank you.
Sage, or Councilwoman Turner, I know that you may be in a car, so I certainly don't want you to try to read this on your phone, but I added, because I think this is important, and we had a lot of discussion at Downtown Commission about this too. So this is from the council's resolution. I should have said that, Councilmember Holman, it is all subject to public records and open meeting law. So all this is done in the sunshine, so to speak. But ultimately, the initial bid steering committee is compiled by the service provider and submitted to the council, who may accept those nominations or request that the bid service provider submit alternative nominees. So I do think council ultimately has, the ability to approve those. But again, they're coming. The service provider is going to compile a full steering committee and bring that full committee to council for your consideration. And then I think if you wanted alternatives, you would identify those at that time. So there is some back and forth.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I hope that's helped. That was and Katie, if you can go back to sharing it again. That was one of the more complicated parts of this, I believe. But again, that'll be coming to council after the contract is awarded. So next slide, please. We're almost to the end. A couple of things. So the statutory minimums are really not a lot for engagement and reporting. So we do anticipate asking more from our service provider. A lot of this came out, I think, in our public engagement. Some of it came from council resolution to establish the bid, but we are going to ask that the service provider at least twice a year go out and solicit feedback and input. That's typically, the statute says once a year, but we're going to ask for it to be twice a year. We think that's important because that feedback can happen perhaps once in the summer season and then a second time in the winter season, because conditions tend to be different times of the year. We're asking for the annual report to City Council. That's a statutory requirement. That has to be a written report as well as a presentation. That'll happen once a year. We are asking the provider to provide quarterly reports to the city manager's office and the Downtown Commission. Obviously, our goal would be to have those quarterly reports eventually be on some type of dashboard or some public-facing instrument that people can see. But that's a way for us to track. And of course, we can bring those back to PED regularly to take a look at as well. There'll need to be accounting of all funds that are budgeted and spent. As I said earlier, we're going to ask the provider to track progress on their initiatives and provide data-driven metrics to make sure they meet the bid objectives, which we had on the, I think, second slide that council set out. And then finally, we're going to ask the service provider to make sure they align their services, goals, and strategies with the City Council's vision and annual priorities. So that is what we're proposing in terms of engagement and regular reporting. Next slide. Did go to the Downtown Commission. It was a good meeting, a lot of discussion. Ultimately, they did recommend moving forward with an RFP for the bid that was unanimous. They gave us 4 bullet points for consideration. They want an applicant that demonstrates coordination and synergy with city services. We do as well. We think that's important if our contractor can work really closely with our operational departments. They want an applicant that agrees to standards for community engagement. I think engagement's really critical for the Downtown Commission. And of course, they're going to see quarterly reports. So hopefully we can identify any trends that we're seeing in terms of bid services. They want the applicant to be accountable and remain accountable to the boards, at city boards, the steering committee, staff, and the community at large. So again, I think that speaks to just the need for transparency and regular reporting from our service provider. And then finally, this is a bullet we did not have in here when it was first published last week, so I made a note of that. But the other thing Downtown Commission mentioned was ensuring that buskers, food trucks, gig workers, anybody that would be involved in the use of open space or open land or public space in downtown, that they're considered in any future bid programming. So again, we'll try to make sure we work this into the RFP as much as we can. Next slide, please. Service. So once we receive RFPs or responses to the RFP, we'll have to do an evaluation. And so this is what we are proposing right now for the RFP evaluation. This will be, of course, represented in the RFP, so respondents can see this. But it will be principally a committee of city representatives. We've got a number of departments that are listed there. That really touches most of those would be the departments that I think would be impacted or already have services that occur in the downtown area. So they have something at stake, so to speak. We may have 1 to 2 downtown commission members. I don't remember Councilwoman Turner. I think they agreed upon 2, if I remember correctly. So we'll have 2 downtown commission members on the evaluation committee as well. And then on the left, you can see kind of the breakdown of points that we're proposing to include. So I'll give council a second to look at this because this is probably the first time you've seen it. All right, and yeah, real quickly on the evaluation committee, it's 1 downtown commission member with 1 alternative or 1 backup. And you can see in the first criteria, it's really what they're able to show us that they can implement these needed services, their experience, their ability to manage this type of program, how they align with our goals, and then of course their MWBE outreach strategy. If there are no questions on that, next slide, Katie. Next step, so here's kind of where we're at. We want to have the RFP out September 20th. We'll have a pre-proposal meeting for any interested vendors on the 24th of September. Take questions on the 25th. Any addendum that are required will be issued on October 1st. Our goal is to have RFP close on October 11th. So if you're a potential respondent and you're looking at this, it is a pretty tight turnaround, but I think a lot of information is already available through these slide decks that we've done. We'd like to have all our evaluation done by November 8th. We want to have City Council a contract to you on November 19th. Have the contracted bid service provider beginning their launch of operations 1st of January. And hopefully in March, in the spring, beginning to report what they're doing. And again, don't necessarily expect to have everything stood up in this first 6 months, but we need to have a service provider that can make meaningful progress pretty quickly. Any questions on the next steps?
Yes, one thing I was wondering, like you said, it is a really quick turnaround. So do you already have a pool of prospective service providers that actually work in this arena that you've already sort of, have to sort of reach out to? Or I was just wondering.
I really do. We do not have a pool. We haven't had a lot of inquiries. I mean, I'll say, most downtowns, or a lot, I think oftentimes the downtown association plays some role in the bid. So I would expect the ADA would probably play a role. Again, I don't know how people are going to partner up or what that's going to look like, but we haven't had a lot of direct contact on this, Councilwoman Kilgore. So I'm not sure what to expect, honestly.
I've heard of some other proposals, some other nonprofits coming together to talk about it. I don't know if those are moving forward, but I have heard interest from ADA. I've heard interest from some other nonprofits too. So that's a little anecdotal.
If we have no other questions, then thank you.
Thank you. And sorry that took longer than I expected, but I thought it was important and I appreciate.
Very-
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, that was a lot of information, but great information. Thank you, Ben. And our next item on the agenda will be the presentation of the Reed Creek Greenway feasibility study. Jessica Morris from the Transportation Assistant Director and Haley Burton, Urban Planner 2, will do the presentation. Thank you. And this presentation will be for review and discussion.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Haley Burton. I'm a planner from the Transportation Department, and I'm here to give an overview of the recently completed Reed Creek feasibility study. So to start off with some key takeaways, the existing sections of the Reed Creek Greenway, which run adjacent to Broadway Street, are currently heavily used for transportation and recreation purposes. Completing the 2 remaining sections of the Reed Creek Greenway is a number 3 top priority that was identified in the adopted GAP plan. And it also came out, both sections came out as in the top 5 desired projects from a recent Metropolitan Planning Organization survey. The purpose of the study, we looked at various alignments and connectivity options and used completed extensive community outreach to develop recommendations for final alignment. And the next step following this feasibility study is design and engineering plans to really figure out how to build this on the ground. Our staff recommendation is prioritizing funding the design and engineering and eventual construction for the northern section of the study, which we'll get into later. And we think that the general obligation bond is a potential funding source for this. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of the study itself. In 2021, we received $40,000 in grant funding from the French Broad River MPO. And then in December 2022, we put out a request for qualifications, and Mick Adams ended up as the chosen consultant. We kicked off the project in June of 2023 and took about a year to complete the study, with final deliverables completed last July. And again, the recommendations were informed through data collection, a project steering committee, various stakeholder meetings, and additional public input. Next slide. An overview of the current Greenway itself. The existing portion of the Reed Creek Greenway spans 0.8 miles from W.T. Weaver and Broadway down to Elizabeth Street in the Montford neighborhood. We'll show a map of this later if you're not familiar. And we have some usage data from the Greenway itself. And in 2023, there were over 156,000 users on the Greenway, which is an daily average of 430 users. And so far this year, there have been around 112,000 users. So this is a really old Greenway in our city, and it's a Greenway that sees a lot of use. Again, the extension of this Greenway was a top priority in the city of Asheville's 2020, I think should be 2021, Close the Gap plan. And this extending the Greenway would provide for future connections to other Greenway projects and other multimodal improvements that we're seeing in the area. It currently connects to the existing Glen Creek Greenway, and extension of the Greenway would provide connections to the NCDOT multimodal improvements coming on Riverside Drive, a Woodfin Greenway project, future Montford Greenway, and also the future Bacote Branch Greenway. And again, the recent MPO's public survey that was completed in May 2024 identified both sections of the Reed Creek Greenway in the top 5 desired bike ped projects. Next slide, please. These are just a few pictures if you're not familiar with the Reed Creek Greenway. It's a paved shared use path that's off street. Next slide, please. This is an overview of where we started with our study area for the feasibility study. So the line in the dark green, that's a continuous line, is the existing Reed Creek Greenway. And then at that intersection with the dotted line to the north, that's W.T. Weaver and Broadway. And to the east there is the Glen Creek Greenway. So the project looks at extending the Greenway up to Riverside Drive and Broadway, and also extending it to the south, trying with a goal to ultimately get to the I-26 pedestrian bridge near Isaac Dixon Elementary School. Next slide. This is not the prettiest slide, but this can show in the green, again, is our study areas, and the purple lines represent all the identified transportation corridors in the Greenway Master Plan. So really what this slide is hoping to communicate is that this is a really important connection when we're thinking about the long-term Greenway connectivity and transportation connectivity throughout our city. Next slide. The next couple of slides are an overview of our stakeholder engagement. There are a lot of bullets on this slide, but I think it's reflective of how many stakeholders were involved in this project and how many people we were able to sit down with and actually talk to and receive feedback throughout this project, and it actually impacted the recommendations. I'll just quickly run through these. We had a steering committee, which was comprised of 4 different meetings. There's a future slide that tells you who was on that steering committee. We also received public feedback from community residents through public surveys and an open house, which the picture in this slide is showing. We spoke with the NCDOT Division 13, representatives from UNC Asheville, different landowner coordination meetings for the study area, Asheville Botanical Gardens, the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce, the Montfort Neighborhood Association, different Asheville internal city departments, Asheville City Schools, the Harris Cherokee Center, Hill Street Baptist Church representatives, Stumptown representatives, and we had multiple meetings with the Active Transportation Committee and the Multimodal Transportation Commission. Next slide, please. So like I said, we formed a steering committee that helped guide this process and give more specific feedback throughout the feasibility study. The committee was made up of different members from internal city departments, NCDOT, the French Broad River MPO, UNC Asheville, and the Montfort Neighborhood Association, and an architect from a nearby development. Next slide. We also had a public survey that was open for over a month, and we got some good participation from that. There were over 1,000 participants and almost around 2,000 comments. We advertised the survey through a lot of different formats, online, through public input, the city website. We had a press release. We put out some social media posts. We distributed the survey through different newsletters and listservs. We went in person to a community engagement market at the Klondike Apartments. And we utilized MMTC and Active Transportation Committee members' networks. We advertised the survey at a regional event for a regional Greenway forum. We also had the event at the Festival of Neighborhoods, and we circulated the survey through different community organizations and contacts. Next slide. This is a brief overview of the demographics of who participated in that public survey. I'm not going to read this all now, but you can see the main age group was around 36 to 45 in terms of participants. Around 82% of respondents were white, and then it was about 50-50 in terms of gender. Next slide, please. Some of the key takeaways from the survey itself is that respondents plan to use the Greenway extension primarily for walking. 83% said they would use it for walking. And then following that was using it for biking, so 68%. Half of the survey respondents said that they would use the proposed extension at least a few times a week, and another 31% indicated they would use it a few times a month. Survey respondents prioritized a route that provides access between the existing greenways and bicycle and pedestrian facilities, followed by a route that provides safe crossings of major roadways. There were 86 comments, again, out of about 2,000, that expressed a desire for a more direct connection downtown from UNC Asheville and Montfort in the Montfort neighborhood. And comments also reflected a desire for increased safety and maintenance of facilities. And this map on the right is taken from the survey data. It shows all the desired infrastructure improvements, and I'll just point out that many of them are clustered along that Broadway portion of the Greenway leading up to Riverside Drive. Next slide, please. This slide is a summary of all the feedback, all those different meetings and stakeholders that we met with. Generally, the majority of comments in stakeholder meetings reflected support for the project. I'll just say anecdotally, I think this was the first time I've worked on a project where I didn't hear a single person say, I don't want this. There was definitely feedback on the routes itself or what this could look like on the ground, but in general, people are excited and wanting this project to happen. Both the community survey, the steering committee, and the meetings from the Montfort Neighborhood Association reflected that desire for a more direct and improved connection downtown, which is reflected in the final recommendations we'll look at later. There were parking concerns that we heard from the Botanical Gardens and Chamber of Commerce. I think they were happy to hear that there's a new parking lot, an unpaved parking lot on Broadway Street that came as part of a recent development. And the additional connection downtown also leads to the Harris parking garage. And we talked about making sure that we build in signage opportunities into the design and engineering phase of this project. There were varying preferences from the two alternatives of the southern project section of this project. I won't, without looking at the two alternatives, it's hard to know what I'm talking about, but basically there are variances, and an end result of those conversations is that we need more future engagement for the southern section. When we met with the Stumptown residents or previous Stumptown residents, they expressed a desire to honor the history of Stumptown. And that's something that we also see an opportunity for future coordination with in the design and engineering phase of the southern section of the project. And letters of support for this were received from UNC Asheville, the Botanical Gardens, MMTC, and the Active Transportation Committee. Next slide, please. Getting into the actual recommendations for the project, this is a overview showing the connections to the north still ending at Riverside Drive, and then the connection through the south, which looks a little bit different from where we started. We can go to the next slide. So starting with the northern section, this map, the dotted lines in gray reflect all of the different options that were studied. And the line in green is showing, the dotted line in green is showing what is the final recommendations. So this is showing, you can see there's a little 2 and a 1C. So section 1C is looking at that intersection of W.T. Weaver up to the I-26 exit off ramp. And that would be a shared use path that is elevated and separated, meaning it's not right next to the road, but it goes kind of up the hillside to provide some greater separation and safety for users. And that's an estimated 0.4 miles in length and around $4.84 million. That second section is from the exit 25 off ramp to Riverside Drive. It's a shared use path with a buffer between the road facilities, and it's around a 1/4 mile in length. And its estimated project cost is 0 because we believe that it will be part of the NCDOT STIP project to complete that portion. Next slide, please. This is just showing what this, giving you a better idea of what this would actually look like. So this is that section I was talking about. That is the hillside side path along Broadway Street, starting from W.T. Weaver. Would require a retaining wall. Yeah. Next slide, please. And this is showing going under the future I-26 overpass. It's a 12-foot concrete side path with a 6-foot planting strip next to the travel lane. Next slide. Getting into the southern section, this is a broad overview. The lines, again, in light gray are showing everything that was studied. The green and that, I guess, like teal color are showing final recommendations. And that purple dotted line above Isaac Dixon Elementary is showing the future Montford Greenway. Not currently built. We don't have plans for it yet, but could provide an additional future connection there. Next slide, please. So kind of breaking the southern section into 2 portions. This is reflecting the path that goes through the Montford neighborhood itself through a neighborhood greenway. So we're not, when we say neighborhood greenway, we're not talking about a large infrastructure project. We're not talking about the Wilma Dykeman Greenway. We're talking about safety improvements through things like additional signage, additional visibility for people walking and biking. We're also showing here a connection on Montford Ave from Bearden Ave to Hill Street, which would be an extension of the existing sidewalk to create a shared use path. And then something that was, I think, a direct outcome of a lot of the outreach that we did is this improved connection from Elizabeth Street along Flint Street to downtown that's coming out at the Harris Cherokee Center. And the Flint Street connector would allow for buffered bike lanes just on the Flint Street Bridge, so that portion from Cherry Street to where it terminates. And the estimated project cost for this section of the southern section is $1.62 million. Next slide. Again, just want to emphasize the portion that was going through Montford neighborhood, since this is a new typology in our city. A neighborhood greenway, again, just contributes to enhanced safety features and a more bicycle and pedestrian friendly environment. This picture on the right is an example of how you can use wayfinding signage and branding to let people know this is the best route for them to take to get to connect to the rest of the greenway. And you can also include traffic calming and prioritize access to make the route easier for people. And I'll just point out that for this project in particular, there's no recommendation for the addition of bike lanes, widening of sidewalks, or removal of parking in the neighborhood greenway portion of this project. Next slide, please. So going into the other portion of the southern section, this is by far the most complicated part of this project. We're showing two different alternatives here, and just want to point out from the get-go, this is an either-or scenario. They both have different benefits and drawbacks as well. And the way the recommendation is stated in the study is that both should be considered for future options. So additional landowner coordination is needed, additional pursuit of funding to clarify our options would be needed as well. So the two options, the top option is an off-street connection. It's running in between what was formerly the North Star Academy and the Chamber of Commerce's property, and then goes along the Isaac Dixon Elementary School property to get to that I-26 pedestrian bridge. That would provide a safe alternative, but would also be a more costly option. And then the second option is running along Hill Street and increasing the sidewalk width where possible, though there are many constraints along that corridor where widening the sidewalk would not be possible. Next slide. So to summarize our next steps, staff believes we should focus on the northern section between W.T. Weaver and Riverside Drive. The design and construction of the northern section is estimated to be around 4.5 to 4.9 million. And if approved, the GO bond would likely be used as the primary funding source to proceed with the design, engineering, and construction. And finally, we want to do future engagement with direct stakeholders to finalize the routing and recommendations for the southern section. Next slide. So I hope I've communicated this throughout this project. This current greenway is heavily used. This is a project with a lot of desire from the public to see it built. It's a top priority, and the study looked at different alignments and connectivity options, and we used extensive public outreach to get to those recommendations. And we're hoping to see the northern section funding design and engineering and construction through the GO bond. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Sage, Councilwoman Turner.
Not so much a question, but my goodness, if we gave out awards for like engagement activities and efforts, you might win. That was a lot. I was kind of chuckling as you went through the list of ways you reached out in different capacities and stuff. Just a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. We're trying.
Councilwoman Holman.
Thanks. Great presentation. I had the fortune of being able to ask a lot of questions in a recent multimodal commission meeting as well. Glad to see that staff is really saying kind of the priority when looking at these two segments is the northern section. I think that that's the more dangerous section. I think that's the more needed one. I do feel like when I consider the southern section, if we're going to continue putting a lot of time or resource into this exploration, I would be curious if we could contextualize this and like what are the other things? Because if we continue to explore this section, I'm curious, like, what does that mean we're not exploring? And the reason I'm picking at this is we have pretty decent existing infrastructure of our sidewalks in those neighborhoods. There is generally slow traffic. They are some of our most predictable block by block neighborhoods that if I zoom out and think of all of the places where we have needs for connectivity for greenways and sidewalk infrastructure, this doesn't jump to being my first one. And I think of places like the northern section that are dangerous, that are legitimately dangerous and people are using, or I think of Sweet and Creek Road, or I think of how we get to East Asheville. So to me, I don't just see this in the like, do we pick the northern or southern section? To me, I'd be curious, do we keep investing in the southern section if it comes at the expense of other places where it's a lot more dangerous to get on board? So I don't mean to say I'm trying to dive bomb one of them, but having used these routes, spent a lot of time on these, 1.62 million in infrastructure could go a long way in other places. And this seems like a generally safer area than some of the other places in our GAP plan. So I just would love to see that context, and tell me I'm wrong. Would love to hear it if I'm not seeing a bigger picture, but just want to chime in. I think to me, safety and connectivity are really important. And I think most residents can connect themselves to where the greenway ends to downtown without enhanced infrastructure. So those are just some of the things I'd want to chime in on.
Jessica?
I'll just say that, you know, I agree, and I don't think that we would necessarily prioritize the southern section as a whole over any other greenway projects or pedestrian projects, but we might find opportunities to even piece out that southern section into smaller chunks and move things forward if something aligns. For example, you know, there's a proposed development that is adjacent to the Isaac Dixon Elementary School. So if an opportunity comes forward to achieve a section of this project, and of course we would take that opportunity. Additionally, with the I-26 connector project, part of that includes replacement of the pedestrian bridge that goes over I-240 that connects to Isaac Dixon. So that's why we still think there's some importance there is some importance in trying to move the project forward, but it might be that we piecemeal it into smaller sections, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's really great. It's like if we want to leverage public-private partnerships or public-public partnerships with DOT, we need to have the planning thoughts in mind in order to take advantage of those types of partnerships to improve our infrastructure. And I think we talked around some of this in MMTC, so thanks for retreading, but that does make a lot of sense of if this allows us to seize a partnership. That's a good strategy, and I appreciate that, and appreciate being heard that you know, this might not be my top priority for where we'd put new infrastructure dollars from the city, and it sounds like that we're thinking about that similarly. So appreciate being able to explore that.
Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much, Helen. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll move on to the number 4 item on our agenda, which is to review proposed micro mobility and related ordinance update. Jessica Mars, from Transportation Assistant Director, will also, and Haley Burton, and Taylor Mars, Assistant City Attorney, actually, so for this. And they will review proposed red line ordinance changes related to micromobility and bike lane and roadways. This will be for review and recommendations to the full council.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilwoman Kilgore. Jessica Morris, Assistant Director of Transportation. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of a team that worked on it very diligently, including Haley, as well as Taylor Morris, our Assistant City Attorney, helped significantly with this, and he is available also in case there are questions that relate. Let's see. So key takeaways. This is being brought forward in relation to the College Patent Project, Complete Streets project that we brought forward last October, and council had requested at that time that we take a look at all of our ordinances and how they relate to micromobility, and specifically address ordinances and make revisions in order to permit the use of what we're calling personal transportation devices within bike lanes. So we couldn't really just look at the bike lane portion only, since bike lanes are on roadways. We also needed to look at our ordinances related to using these kinds of transportation devices on roadways. And so we also wanted to look at sidewalks as well. And greenways. So we kind of decided it would be best to take a more holistic approach in looking at our ordinances. So we have come up with some proposed revisions that address several pieces of our code. And this was done through a combination of looking at industry best practices, seeking feedback from our boards and commissions, and also, very much a lot of this had to do with the legal aspects of looking at our code, making sure that we were interpreting state law and looking at state law and seeing that we were in compliance with state law. So we are proposing these ordinance changes, and really the goals here are to remove barriers for using personal micromobility devices, and enhancing their use, decriminalizing their use, and improving the accessibility, affordability, and safety of our transportation system. So the primary reason for this was because we received council direction for looking at personal transportation within bike lanes. We just want to note up front clearly that we are maintaining the prohibition on e-scooter share operators. So we're not proposing any changes to that. And we just want to make sure that that's clear and centered, so that there's no confusion about that. But we've been seeing visually and hearing from folks that people are using e-devices. They're using e-skateboards, they're using e-scooters. And these are folks that own their own device. And so we want to make sure that we are not criminalizing that use, because right now they are prohibited by our code. So that was kind of the impetus for this. And we want to update our codes so that they are just more in line with today's practices and today's transportation devices that are out there and that people are using. This is just a list of the code sections that we will be revising. Some of these are pretty old. They talk about skateboards, roller skates, coasters, which I don't know what that is, but these are the things that we're going to be looking at and revising. So as I mentioned, we looked through current industry best practices, we heard community feedback, and we worked with our city attorney's office to come up with these recommended changes. It had outreach to our active transportation committee, our multimodal commission, our downtown commission, and the riverfront commission. And we also had brought this to an early kind of preview and got some feedback from the PED earlier this year. And, you know, there are some differences between what we're bringing forward now and what we had originally proposed for a couple aspects of this. And that was really done because of some limitations that we have within state code and making sure that we're not in, you know, that we're compliant as best we can be with state code. So there are a number of types of devices to kind of tease out as part of this conversation, and we'll walk through them all diligently, and please feel free to stop and ask me questions. The state law does have a lot of different transportation modes already described and in some cases defined, but the state code is obviously not caught up to current times. So there isn't, you know, a definition in state law about e-scooters or e-skateboards. So we have to make sure that what we're proposing stays within the current boundaries of what is in the state code, and that we interpret it in a way that makes sense for the city. So there is a definition for vehicles in our state code, and it's basically anything that can be used on a highway, which really means a street or a roadway, moved by, not moved by human power. So that means that it's not something like roller skates or a skateboard that you push with your foot. It's not, vehicles are not things that are on fixed rails or tracks like a train, but it does include bicycles and electric bikes. And and it basically says that these types of vehicles are allowed to be used on streets. It also says that it shall not include an electric personal assisted mobility device, which is, we'll talk about what that means as well. So we are trying our best to split things up in a way that makes logical sense and is based on our thorough review with our legal staff into things that are vehicles and things that aren't vehicles, generally speaking. So looking at the state law, vehicles include things like cars and trucks, which makes sense, includes bikes and electric bikes, because that's specifically stated in there. And then we're making some interpretations that, based on the state law, electric devices, so things that are propelled by an electric motor, so electric scooters, skateboards, those one-wheel devices that you see the kids using, those we feel fall under the vehicle definition based on our interpretation. Mopeds and golf carts are also considered to be vehicles in our interpretation of the law. So things that aren't considered to be vehicles are pedestrians. Pedestrians includes wheelchair users. So wheelchair users are considered to be a pedestrian in terms of state law. And so there's some limitations there as well. The electric personal assisted mobility device is something that's actually has a very specific definition in state law that is really meant to cover Segways. When the Segway company came into existence, they recognized the need to have a definition in each state's code for being allowed to use a Segway. And so there's a very specific definition that basically describes a Segway, and a hoverboard nowadays would also fill that definition as well. So because state law says that it does not include electric personal assisted mobility devices, we're considering that to be in the not vehicle category. And then separate from that, we are considering things like roller skates and non-electric or non-motor powered devices to be human powered. So we're trying to make a distinction between human powered and what we're going to call self-propelled, which means that it's an electric assisted device. So just to throw some visuals in there helps sometimes. This is what we are considering to be vehicles. So cars and trucks, bikes and electric bikes, electric scooters, skateboards, one wheels, mopeds, and golf carts. And establishing all these definitions is important. You know, we're doing this up front because there's different that we're going to have that we'll get into related to these. And that's why it's important to make sure we're on the same page with what we're talking about. Pedestrians. So we've got pedestrians and also includes wheelchair users. And we are interpreting that to include both electric wheelchairs and non-electric wheelchairs, self-propelled wheelchairs and human-powered wheelchairs. This is actually, this quote is straight out of the state law that talks about what an electric personal assisted mobility device is. And when you read it, you can kind of tell that it was specifically written for Segways. Non-tandem means that the wheels are next to each other. Self-propulsion system that balances itself. So that is a very kind of narrow definition for that exact type of technology. So there is no definition for micromobility in state law. There's no definition really for like personal transportation devices. So in our city code, we are going to have some proposed definitions that will include under kind of an umbrella of micromobility, both self-propelled and human-powered devices. And so anything that we're kind of intentionally leaving it somewhat vague so that when the next new device is invented, we don't necessarily have to update our code or our ordinances. So we're saying any small, lightweight, low speed, self-propelled or human powered device that is basically for the purpose of transporting a human being. That is what our proposed definition is. And then we further will kind of break those down into self-propelled versus human-powered. And again, this self-propelled is what we, in interpreting state law, we think it actually falls under the definition of a vehicle. And these would be the electric assisted devices, e-skateboards, one wheels, e-scooters. And then the human powered or the old school transportation devices, roller skates, regular skateboards, roller blades, which I guess are popular again, razor scooters, those kinds of things would fall under human powered. And so in essence, you know, our ordinance changes are meant to comply with the regulations related to vehicles as interpreted in state law. And so this is where it gets into the nitty gritty. So vehicles are allowed on streets. We can't regulate which vehicles can be on which streets. So just like I can't tell you where to drive, what street to drive your car on, if someone's using an electric scooter, I can't regulate what street to be on. So that's something that's a little different than what we talked about previously. We had been looking at limiting the use of electric scooters and such to lower speed streets. But because we feel that they would be considered to be vehicles, we can't actually regulate that. But having said that, we also can't regulate we have to also prohibit them on sidewalks. So we can't, one thing we had discussed previously was we had a whole bunch of conversation about whether or not electric scooters should be allowed on sidewalks in downtown. Generally speaking, it seemed as though a lot of folks didn't want that. So I guess the good news is that we actually, if we consider them to be vehicles, we can't allow them on sidewalks. But reminder that bicycles and electric bicycles are actually considered vehicles. So they are allowed or they're considered vehicles, but in their definition, it specifically says they can be on sidewalks. So there's a lot of weird nuances to this, and please stop me if you have any questions. Yes.
I do. Well, you don't have to go back to the slide, but you actually considered wheelchairs and even electric wheelchairs. Those were basically cannot be used, are not considered vehicles, so they cannot be used in the bike lanes. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and we have a slide. I think I have a slide that talks a little bit more about that. But generally, yes, because they're considered to be pedestrians, and state law says that pedestrians have to be on a sidewalk if there is one. If there isn't a sidewalk, then pedestrians can be on the street, and bike lanes are on the street. So we believe they could be in a bike lane. But if there is a sidewalk present, then state law requires that pedestrian to use that sidewalk.
Okay, Taylor? Taylor? Okay.
Yes. Thanks, Vice Mayor Kilgore. This is Taylor Morris, Assistant City Attorney. So I'll just give a little bit of clarity on this in case this is helpful, and also the point on bicycles. So talking about wheelchairs and electric wheelchairs, basically the state law says that essentially electric wheelchairs or similar devices that pedestrians people who have mobility impairments are using basically to get around, as if like pedestrians, are treated as having the same rights and duties and responsibilities as pedestrians. And elsewhere in state law, we basically get provisions that say, if sidewalks are available for pedestrians, pedestrians are supposed to utilize those sidewalks. And if the sidewalk is not available, the pedestrian is supposed to go to basically, I believe, at the left side of the road and walk along that left side of the road. So the issue with having a pedestrian in a bike lane is that where there's a sidewalk, having a wheelchair user in a bike lane would be that where there is a sidewalk, it would seem like if the wheelchair users have the same rights and duties as pedestrians, they have to be on that sidewalk. Where there's not, state law also talks about where a pedestrian needs to be on the road, and it's on that left side of the road, kind of facing the oncoming traffic. And so that would also not be in the bike lane. So we have, if you kind of put those together and synthesize those points, you can see that the state law is kind of already directed where you should be on the road, whether there's a sidewalk or there's not a sidewalk if you are a wheelchair user. The other point that I'll come back to just with bikes, because this might have been confusing, is there is so bikes are considered to be vehicles. They are not considered to be motor vehicles. And there is a specific state law provision that basically says you cannot drive a motor vehicle on a sidewalk. So bikes are vehicles and they could go on a sidewalk in that case, but most vehicles, because they're self-propelled, are also going to be considered to be motor vehicles, and they would have a problem with driving on a sidewalk. Whereas a bike, because it's not self-propelled, it's human-powered, but nonetheless is considered to be a vehicle, it would be allowed on the sidewalk. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And the only reason I asked that question, I know earlier when we first had this conversation, basically there were people that were in wheelchairs. were concerned. They wanted to use the bike lane because they figured it was smoother and much easier to get around. And so I was just wanting to make sure that basically they, with this rule and regulation, they will not be able to use the wheelchairs in the bike lanes. I was just trying to get some clarity there.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not, this was one of the areas where we had to change direction in terms of what our original desire was, I guess, in order to enhance mobility versus what we felt like we could safely do within state law guidance. So as I mentioned, there's a couple areas where we had to kind of change course based on what we interpret in state law, and that is unfortunately one area where we had to change our recommendation. So just continuing on here. So again, we are removing restrictions on personally owned e-scooters or e-devices, but we are still continuing to prohibit the companies that do the mass sharing of devices like that and who rent them from the sidewalk. That is still prohibited. But if I want to own my own e-scooter and ride it to work, then that is no longer going to be prohibited with these changes. Councilwoman Turner?
Isn't that really exciting? I'm really excited to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, it's not that we were necessarily actively enforcing that prohibition, but it's nice to, I think, decriminalize something that obviously a lot of people are using and are gaining, gaining usership every day. Following up on the pedestrian regulations, kind of talking about what we just were talking about, the wheelchair users are considered to be pedestrians within state law, and pedestrians are required to use sidewalks when there is one available, or if there isn't one available, then to be on the left side of the road facing oncoming traffic. And so our legal interpretation is that pedestrians and wheelchair users are not allowed in bike lanes if there is a sidewalk available. And they're not allowed in bike lanes if there isn't a sidewalk available. I guess we should say that as well. So our ordinance changes are also proposed to use our city authority to regulate human-powered devices. So these are the non-electric skateboards, roller skates, and things. We can't, because they are not vehicles, we do have the ability to restrict what roadways they're used on. So we are proposing to limit their use to roadways that are 30 miles per hour or less. And that includes pretty much every residential street, neighborhood street, which is where you are most likely to encounter folks using those kinds of devices anyways. But we can also allow them to be used in a bike lane because they are not considered to be a vehicle. And we also are proposing to permit their use on greenways. So our ordinance changes will provide a penalty structure for noncompliance. Basically keeps the existing language that if someone is found to be in violation of the ordinance, there would be a fine not more than $50. And it would also propose to add language that any penalties, infractions, or enforcement would not be inconsistent with the Constitution and laws of North Carolina and the United States, which is pretty standard language, I believe. We would, as I mentioned, be creating our own city definition of micromobility. And we would, within that definition, we would be differentiating between self-propelled and human-powered devices. We would state that the opportunity to limit sidewalk riding of human-powered micromobility devices through a dismount zone. So that's more of an educational piece. It's not necessarily like that we would probably include it in the law, the code, but we'd also have a signage and potentially like pavement markings that we could use to emphasize that you wouldn't be allowed to ride an e-device on the sidewalk. So dismount zones are something that we would likely look to do in places where there's more pedestrian activities, such as like the downtown or Haywood Road. And sorry, and just one more thing, we wouldn't necessarily designate those specific dismount areas in the code, but it would, so we would have some flexibility to modify that in the field. Vice Mayor?
I just want to ask you a question. I think you had earlier in the slides that the bicycle lanes basically have a speed limit. What is that speed limit on the bicycle lanes? Where you can use these multi-mobility.
So not for bicycles, but for human-powered devices like roller skates, skateboards, and roller blades, things that aren't an e-device. We can regulate where those are used because they're not vehicles. And so our proposal is to limit those to roads that are 30 miles per hour or less. And
so you don't really have a speed limit for that bicycle lane. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is there? Okay.
No. Like the speed that the user would be able to go. No.
To be able to restrict it, because with so much, this electric bike, some of those go really fast. I mean, I'm just saying, and then you've got, so I was just wondering if there was any. So in actuality, the bicycle lanes do not have any restrictions on speed, but the actual roadways does in the downtown area. It's about 20 miles.
Well, no, I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood. So I apologize. But my understanding is that if there's a bicycle lane present on a roadway, then the speed limit applies to that whole roadway, including the bicycle lane.
Okay, that's what I was at, yes. Okay.
Yeah, so if the speed limit's 20 miles an hour in downtown, I shouldn't be riding my bicycle 25 miles per hour.
That's exactly what I was trying to get to, what I saw. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is this is a summary slide that's, again, trying to kind of visualize what we're proposing to change versus not change in the code. The blue boxes are where we're proposing something to change in the code. So, for example, that first line, bikes and e-bikes, we're not proposing to change anything. We're staying consistent with what state law says. State law says that bikes and e-bikes can be used on any street. They can be used on bike lanes. It also says that because they're not motor vehicles, they can be used on sidewalks. And so we're also extending that to greenways. The next line, self-propelled micromobility, which are like the e-scooters and the e-devices. We are proposing to change code sections related to that because we can't tell them they can't be on roadways. We have to say that they will be allowed on streets that are both below and above 30 miles per hour, and that they can be used. I'm sorry, wait, did I mess that up? They can be used in bike lanes, correct? Haley, did I get that right? Yeah. But they cannot be used in sidewalks, whether any sidewalks anywhere. But we are planning to, proposing to allow them on greenways. The human-powered micromobility would not be allowed on streets that are greater than 30 miles per hour. They would be allowed on streets less than 30 miles per hour, as well as in bike lanes and on sidewalks in the CBD. They're already allowed on sidewalks outside of the CBD. So we're changing it to say that you can use skateboards, roller skates, etc., in business districts. And then the electric personal assisted mobility device, that's the one that's very specific to segways and hoverboards. We are proposing to include their ability to be used in bike lanes. Because they are not considered to be vehicles, we do have that option. And then lastly, wheelchairs are considered to be pedestrians. We're not really planning to change anything that's in our current code, but we are going to be specifying that they are not allowed to be in bike lanes since they are pedestrians. Any questions?
Yes. Well, the thing is, when I was looking at the human-powered skateboards and roller skates and things of that nature, I'm just wondering, those can be used on the sidewalks, but it's outside. Okay, outside of the businesses. That's okay, right? So they can.
So currently, our code says that you can use a human-powered device like a skateboard outside of a business district on a sidewalk.
On a sidewalk.
So if you were riding, you could ride your skateboard on the sidewalk on Tunnel Road, but you can't ride your sidewalk downtown. Ride your skateboard on a sidewalk downtown. That's what our current code says. We're proposing to change that so that you can ride a skateboard or rollerblades or roller skates on any sidewalk.
So you're proposing. So you are proposing. That's what I was concerned about. So you're human-powered micromobility, so skateboards and roller skates. So you're saying that they can use them in the business district sidewalks?
Correct. The human-powered ones, not the e-scooters, not the.
Yeah. That's why I was really concerned about that, because I was thinking that if you do, for me, I'm just wondering how if there is the bike lane accessible, then it shouldn't be allowed on the actual business district sidewalks. I'm just sort of throwing something out there, because I think for me, like I said, in the business district, even if you have these, the human, micromobility, to me, in the business district, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with them actually being on the sidewalks, but maybe if there was something where if it isn't a bike lane. So in other words, if they are there and there is a bike lane, they need to be on a bike lane rather than the sidewalk, to keep that type of, to me, because I just think by the sidewalks being so limited and how crowded it gets in the business district, by having them there when it's not, to me, would prevent it. So is there any kind of way, I don't know if anybody else feels about that, but I was just wondering if there's any kind of way we could maybe do the wording that if it is a bicycle lane available, that they should not use the sidewalk.
Yeah, we can certainly discuss that. I mean, I'd love to hear from the other council members on that point, and then, but that is something that I feel like we could write in a way we can write it that way if we desire to.
Yeah, I'm just concerned by that. I don't know if anybody else is Maggie or Sage, but
yeah. And I got to be honest, some of the detail on this, it's a little hard to track. So if you've already looped through this, I apologize. But what is the why behind changing this in the business district? So for example, Lexington Avenue is currently cobblestone bricks. That's kind of dangerous to walk with feet,
right.
let alone wheels. So what is the why behind making this adjustment in the business districts where we know there's a lot of pedestrian traffic already?
I think there's a couple things. You know, a lot of cities in like the mid 60s, 70s impose these skateboard bans. And, you know, you go around and you look at codes from other cities and we've all pretty much got the same written rule about skateboards not being allowed. And it was sort of there was concerns about vandalism of skateboards damaging city property, etc. And so there's sort of these blanket bans about not being able to use a skateboard in a business district on a sidewalk. And so, you know, part of what we wanted to explore was decriminalizing that use, or that decriminalizing that, because right now if you're riding a skateboard on a sidewalk in downtown, you technically could be ticketed. And
skateboard or a bicycle or roller skates or a scooter.
Bicycles, no. This is confusing, and this is why we're trying to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Right, because they're its own row.
The state law actually specifically says that bikes and e-bikes can be used on a sidewalk, or it doesn't prohibit them from being used on a sidewalk. But other things, our code has specifically prohibited, including skateboards and roller skates and stuff. Can't use that on a sidewalk in a business district. So if your kid is riding a skateboard or roller skates downtown on a sidewalk, technically they're in violation of the law. Now, it's not saying that they have to ride it on a sidewalk, but if you feel uncomfortable riding your skateboard on the street and there's a sidewalk available, our thought was allow it and decriminalize it. Because if it's a human powered one, theoretically, it's not going to go, it can't go as fast as like an e-scooter or something of that nature. So that was our thought process behind that.
Haley?
Yeah, another piece of this conversation is understanding like the nuances of our zoning. And so like what is considered a business district often is a lot larger than the streets that we're thinking of like, how would you even ride on this street when on the sidewalk when there's pedestrians there? So wanting to change the framework where we're allowing them in business districts, but still building in that tool of potentially signing for dismount zones on specific streets or areas where it might not make sense for those devices to be because of pedestrian traffic.
Right. So encouraging someone to not use it, but not necessarily making it illegal. Clear as mud.
I gotta admit, I feel like I just feel like I'm getting lost, which makes me say like the public is going to be lost. And I keep going back to like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? How much problem is there currently? What's the ultimate purpose of these changes? And I'll give it, you know, it's a Monday at 5:50, so maybe my brain isn't as sharp. I know you've been putting a lot of diligent time into this. And I think the table is your method to streamline. But yeah, I don't really have a crisp feedback, but I do think that there needs to be some real distillation of like, what are we doing? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Because I'm getting muddy in it, and if I can't be the only one.
Right.
Sage.
Yeah, I mean, I actually am very supportive of this. It's what I brought up when we talked about doing the Patton Avenue connective. They were bike lanes. I call them multi-use paths. I mean, that's ultimately the goal, right? To get more modalities using our other modes of transportation. This all makes sense to me. I mean, if wheelchairs are pedestrians, they're on sidewalks. If bikes are vehicles, they can use bike lanes, but can't be on sidewalks, and that's already the state's decided that. But if people can use their personal scooters, bikes, electric skateboards, etc., in our other multi-use paths, I mean, why wouldn't that be a great thing? Are we trying to advance opportunities for transportation that are outside of cars?
No,
Isn't that
I say that I think I agree with you that that's fine for the bike lanes, but I'm just trying to figure out how does that impact our downtown area where we're heavily a pedestrian area. That's my concern. So how do we prevent that from being a situation because it is so heavily
I
pedestrian?
think we're doing a large reduction in speed limits throughout downtown. Are we not? Aren't we all like 20 miles an hour now or slowly becoming that? I mean, it's a great,
Yeah, no,
it's perfect for all the modes. Really, it means that people would have to be more cautious. If anything, we have users using these modalities and it's very unsafe for them right now. But bringing awareness and, directional, like this is where you go access and you should use these connective paths, not the rest of the city, or you need to be, on these devices less than 30 miles an hour. I think that's pretty clear, and beneficial, really. I would think that this will result in more people not using cars, which would of course ease the, traffic flow and congestion and parking in downtown too.
Yeah. No. I'm not against that part. Only part I'm against, Sage, is I'm just really concerned about being able to, because see, it's different when you don't really say these are the rules or regulate whatever, but when you come out and say, okay, we can do skateboards and roller skates and push scooters on sidewalks in the central business district where it's highly, pedestrian use. I just think that if there's some kind of way that we can actually word that to prevent people from actually, it increasing, because see, if you do increase these uses, it's gonna increase. And the pedestrian population is not going to decrease. So I'm just trying to sort of think, okay, Taylor, if you want.
Yes. Thanks, Vice Mayor Kilgore. This is Taylor Morris, Assistant City Attorney. I was going to bring up one item here for you to consider, just given the concern you have and the way that the ordinance, basically the ordinance changes have already been worded. We do talk about, and Jessica had mentioned earlier, the possibility of having dismount zones that would be designated. And this wasn't something that she said that would be designated specifically in the code where a dismount zone might be. But I just wanted to put forward that one potential answer to your concern might be some council direction, or just to take it under advisement on the staff level, that there would be a strong desire to have some of these dismount zones for sidewalks in certain areas of the central business district, such that if we didn't want to have a skateboard or other types of devices like that being used on certain highly trafficked sidewalks, I think you could we could do on the staff level some consideration of, in those highly trafficked areas, maybe not only in the central business district, but in other areas where that would be a concern, trying to incorporate those dismount zones, and hopefully that might alleviate the concern. So I just wanted to put that forward.
No, thanks, Taylor. That would actually work. Thank you. Okay, Sage?
And that's specific to skateboards?
No, well, okay.
No, yeah.
So our proposal as it stands right now is that for the code, so for the law, we would say that e-scooters, e-skateboards, one wheels couldn't be on sidewalks either inside a business district or outside. And we are proposing that if it's a human powered skateboard or push scooter, that you could use it on sidewalks in business districts and outside business districts. But what Vice Mayor Kilgore is concerned about is those human power devices being used on sidewalks in business districts. So the dismount zone, it could be used as a tool of communication to encourage people to dismount. But if we write it in the code that it's prohibited, it really is a tool of it's a regulatory tool. It's a regulatory communication. It's saying you can't ride this here. It's not just an encouragement anymore. It would be a prohibition. So I think that's something to consider is if you are, unless we specifically say you can't ride them on certain roadways or on sidewalks on certain roadways and put that in the code, that would be what we would have to do unless we wanted to have a blanket prohibition on human-powered skateboards and such downtown.
Do we have a map of these areas by zone or proposed speed and use?
No.
What I'm getting at is connectivity. Like, does it even make sense if I get the fear having skateboards, human powered, let's use all the same language, human powered skateboards on sidewalks and pedestrian zones, I don't think will be entirely well received. I don't know that it would multiply just because it became legal. I don't know. But so if enough councilwomen are concerned about that, that's this dismount zone language sounds like an option, but they would still, but then wait, are they prohibited in the other zone? That is only like they couldn't be in the bike lanes either?
Dismount zones are for sidewalks only.
Okay, but so if I'm a skateboarder, oh no, okay, I got it. Okay, so that's it could make sense.
And another,
I think I understand.
one more point, if I may, like people using these devices, like they're human too. They're going to want to ride where it's easiest. So if there's a bunch of traffic in the pedestrian traffic in the sidewalk, but there's a bike lane available, I think we can look at how we can word that better in our code, but also in general, I think people will want to ride where it's easier to ride, and they're not having conflicts of their own.
I'll chime in again that that's a great point, Haley. I think ultimately the path of least resistance really does matter a lot, especially when there's some mobility. And I think that anything we can do to let people have different mobility options and to get into a path where people have more choice for different safe options, for cheaper options like roller skating or rollerblading or skateboarding or what have you. I think that we just want to figure out how we're going to communicate it, because I can imagine, I think we have a council that's very supportive of having more modes be safer and safer. And so fast forward, now we're communicating this and training this to our officers who might get called for this, or we're asking, we just need to figure out like a real streamlined story to tell, because I think it's taken a lot of digging through in this conversation. And I think the intent of having easier path for modes to try and be safe and to know what they're going to use, but just it'd be great to have a good think on like, what is that story to tell? Because I just don't want it to get completely lost on the public and then people go, I don't know. I know they changed the rules, but I'm not sure what to do. So for example, we see this in the recycling world a lot. The recycling world has crazy particular rules that change all the time. And we see a lot of people just abandoned the method, because they're like, is it a number 2? Is it a number 4? I'm not sure what I should do. And so I just want to make sure that if this rolls forward, it's just really distilled, that we can articulate crisply and clearly. And I think that you've done a good job getting us this far, but if we can really churn on that some more, because I don't want to disincentivize, because people want to follow the rules, but they're hard to understand. And I think that you're seeking a recommendation, like there's an actual vote for us today. Is there?
Yeah, that's review and recommendations, council, but it didn't say what exactly, Jessica.
Yeah, I apologize for that. Is that, let me see if we have that in our, yeah. So this was the requested action. Essentially our request to you guys is to, I guess, recommend that we bring forward these proposed changes to council. And it would essentially be repealing these certain sections and replacing them with the language that we have in the staff report. However, it feels like maybe there's not consensus, but if you guys want to take a vote, you can, or we are also happy to do some tweaks and come back, whatever you feel is best.
For myself, I would like to see some tweaks and come back just to the part where we were talking about being able to, utilize the human powered devices on the sidewalks and something like you said, dismount, whatever they want to use to make it a little bit more comfortable for the pedestrians, a little bit safer. I would like to see that. I don't know if anyone else is.
I'm fine if that's what it takes to gather more support and help understand some of those concerns brought up today. It'd also be helpful to have some kind of a map. Overall, since I'm not on the transit or multimodal committees, I get piecemeal updates around like what our ultimate connectivity is, planning and timeline, and when we went through Patton Avenue changes, I got a big update, but I don't know what's next, or, it would help just to see this kind of mapped out. So we are also targeting, like we're about to talk about our work plan. Do we need to be looking at, more connectivity movement? But I'm fine if it needs to come back. I'm also happy to make a motion if, Maggie, if you want to keep moving it forward.
That's fine. Maggie, where are you?
Yeah, I mean, I like the direction we're going. I defer to y'all, or I guess I wonder if we could say like we want this to go forward and with some language changes to address that. So I guess the question is like, do we need to roll up our sleeves in this further as a committee, or do we want to recognize the intent of what has been brought up here? It's almost like approved with conditions, like we might see from somewhere like P&Z, so that the next steps are towards council. I'd be up for that. That might be a way to kind of streamline it, but it depends really, Sandra. Like we can dig in and roll up our sleeves on those maps some more and have some more back and forth, or we can kind of say, let's point in this direction with these conditions, and then the next discussion is council level. So maybe that's back to you, Vice Mayor, what you think.
Well, let's hear what Taylor has to say next.
I think that's fine. I mean, if you think we can keep it moving towards council, and Sandra, you feel confident that you could review language and be able to share your feedback or, input, concerns, etc. at the next meeting, then I guess it still would go to what, P&Z? So we'll have a couple more.
Let's see what Taylor has to say. Geez, yeah, needs to say.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I just wanted to, this is Taylor Morris, Assistant City Attorney. I wanted to put forward maybe a suggestion, just given the discussion. It sounds like the Vice Mayor was still concerned about the potential for use of human powered devices on sidewalks in more heavily trafficked areas, and was thinking about potential language changes, or perhaps some visuals on where we could have some limitations on that. And I was going to point out the language about dismount zones, where we could designate a dismount zone where you're supposed to get off of your human powered device. That language is already included in the proposed revisions that we have here. So if we wanted to have that type of clarification, or we wanted to have that type of power, that already exists in the proposed language. But so perhaps my suggestion might be, if the council members are amenable to it, perhaps a vote on the language today, and perhaps with direction that maybe going to council, we could see some potential proposed ideas from staff about where some dismount zones might be, or with an understanding that there might be some additional concern about having them in heavily trafficked areas, and that would move the language forward, but also I think address the concern about maybe being able to see some more specifics and some visuals and some maps about where those, if we had dismount zones, where would staff maybe think about putting them?
Yes, exactly. That would make sense. And that's why Sandra's talking about sort of visual, sort of show us, what we're looking at. That would be great. So how do we,
that's great. So that means this suggested motion already includes that. And we could just also say, basically what you just said, and ensure that, maps and suggested
yes,
dismount zones are included by the time it gets to council.
yes, that's
Okay, well then I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to repeal sections 19-1, 19-6, 19-7, 19-14, and replace with the language represented in the accompanying staff report, and to further include a map and potential dismount zones for future recommendations.
within the CB. Yeah, great. Yeah. Okay, that sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, and so I'll take a roll call. Councilwoman Turner,
Yay!
Councilwoman Holman.
Yay.
Okay, and myself, I. So motion will pass on to council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jessica. And the last thing on our agenda will be the FY 2025 Planning and Economic Development Committee work. Ben Woody, the Assistant Manager, basically review the fiscal year 2025 and this is for information sharing on.
Sandra, I'm sorry to interrupt real quick. I have to go. I have sent Ben some of the comments for work planning, so he may share them on my behalf in my absence. I'm sorry, but I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this will be a brief presentation because we've been at this for a while. Katie, if you can go to the next slide. We actually talked about this at our last meeting, so I'm not going to reread this, but summary is we use the work plans to organize the work of the council committee and to make sure that it connects to your goals and also incorporates your advisory boards where necessary. Next slide. Your scope of work, again, I'm not going to read that, but we reviewed this at your last meeting. Katie, if you can go to the next slide. I think this is the important slide. So these based on information that I've heard from the council committee, and maybe more importantly, based on projects that are already on the existing organizational work plan, these are the topics that I think are things that we want to address in FY25. So we already have a pretty big list of things that need to come to PED. We've got ongoing implementation of plans, Pack Square Vision and GAP plan. You get regular updates on those. We'll continue to do that. We've got some program and operational enhancements, things like the UDO update that we're working on. We've had several meetings already on that. Just had the Business Improvement District today. We'll be back to this committee later in the fiscal year for an update on how that's going. You can see it, I'm not going to read these, but a number of things are on this list that we need to cover with the committee this year. And then finally, we have periodic updates. These are things like want to give occasional updates on how the hotel overlay is working. We want to have updates on efforts at McCormick Field, I-26 connector updates from DOT. One of the things that Sage had mentioned is updates on short-term vacation rentals and how that enforcement's going, permitting trends. Any concerns from either Vice Mayor Kilgore, Councilwoman Ullman on this list? Are we missing something really important?
It's a lot. It's a full list.
Fine.
It's a big list. It's a lot to do.
Yes, yes.
So while I'm here, let me say what I got from Councilwoman Turner. Several of her items are already on the list, but the three that I see that I haven't seen before, rental micromobility. So maybe that's the idea of bike shares or e-scooters. So that's something this committee could certainly discuss. More accessible solar vehicle charging. I think Councilwoman Turner's was, how do we get better access to vehicle charging stations in the city? And then I think she mentioned this earlier, next phases of multi-use, multi-path lanes and connectors. That's probably a topic we can incorporate as part of a gap plan update. But those are just three items again, those are things I can add those three to the list unless somebody really objects. And they could be future discussion items for PED. They're all three kind of transportation related.
That's fine with me then.
Okay. So we're gonna do 3 slides really quickly. Next slide, Katie. So here's the list beginning to be scheduled out. So we had 4 items today. We have 4 items again next month. Next slide, Katie. You can see really we've got a number of items that are tentatively scheduled for November and December. So really through the end of the year, we're pretty busy. Our UDO updates, you can see that's our second bundle, as we've called it, will come to council in January, or PED in January, excuse me. Katie, if you can do the next slide. There's our third bundle of UDO update. So this is really where we end at. So you can see we've built out the schedule to some extent for PED, but I think we've got more to do when you look at the initial list I showed. So any comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question. I see these one at a time disposition of land, and I would hate for us to be asked to be making decisions one parcel at a time in the absence of a coordinated strategy for our land use. So I might be jumping to conclusions what looking at one at a time parcels is implying, but I really don't feel like we have a coordinated strategy for how we're using city land, and would love that to be more of the policy focus so that it's less one at a time out of context parcels.
That's a very great observation, Councilman Ullman. And one of the things that Rachel and I actually just talked about is I think we are gonna bring and we'll need to do this before most of these one-off dispositions, but we are intending, I think, to bring that as a conversation policy discussion at a full council, maybe in an agenda briefing type format. So we just need to get that. Yeah, right. So the whole council could see that topic before we start bringing individual properties to this body.
Yeah, almost like how we did UDO stuff is we had a work session and we kind of pointed like, these are the strategy areas. I think that would help. And so if that means we have to delay or stagger these one at a time things, that would make sense to me, but I don't think council has really set a strategic direction. And so having the committee do it one at a time and I just don't know that we'll get where you want us to go if we do it that way, unless we can have council touch on it at a big picture first.
Yeah, that's good feedback. And I'll try to have that a little more clarified for this body and council. But yeah, I know we need to get the full council on that. But other than that, if you'll go to the next slide, Katie. And I think this is, so we've got a good list of work projects. We need to fill out the schedule with those. I'll try to keep working on that and get that. Maybe I'll get it into a document that's a little easier for PED members to digest. And then I think the next step really for staff is to start to try to coordinate with these advisory boards where we can on some of these topics. So That's really all I have today on this. And again, this is kind of a living, breathing document. So this is going to change periodically based on priorities. Even today, Councilman Ullman, your feedback on the property disposition probably will change some of the scheduling of those individual properties for PED consideration. So any other questions on this? Okay, I'll revise it based on what Councilman Turner shared, and we'll get this back to PED, maybe in a document that you can review and put eyes on again.
Thank you.
That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, so Katie, do we have anyone in public waiting to speak in the queue?
Yes, Vice Mayor, we do have a couple.
Okay.
Just one moment, let me get them queued up. Caller ending in 1663, your line is now open and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, am I able to speak there now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Hi, so I will just introduce myself briefly. I know you guys are probably ready to get out of there soon and kind of wrap up the meeting. But yeah, my name is Eric Hunt and I'm a resident here in town. Grew up in Hendersonville, so like one of the few natives that you'll meet that's spent their entire life here. And I currently run Push Skate Camp, skateboard and roller skate. We kind of adapted like an all wheels welcome method to the camp that takes place at the formerly known as Food Lion Skate Park, the Asheville Skate Park now. And we have like inline skates, skateboarding, roller skating, and even scooters that take place at the camp. I've been teaching that for going on 20 years. I worked in downtown at Push Skate Shop on Patton that is going to next year celebrate their 20-year anniversary. And yeah, I'm just here to support the the kind of motion to move to city council, just changing the ordinance and the prohibition that has been kind of long overdue, standing against skateboarding, roller skating, inlining, and all that stuff for a transportation mode in Asheville. But yeah, I appreciate the work that you guys have put in to kind of research and study the state and local law and trying to change and kind of tailor that to modernize it to, serve the community. Do want to speak on behalf of that community a little bit and say there are a lot of families and people in support of this, I think, happy to see that happening, happy to see it going to council, can understand some of the concerns and everything. I do think myself, from listening to that, I've been listening for an hour and a half now, it seems pretty well defined and stuff to me personally, and really does seem to make a lot of sense. And I appreciate how it's articulated. And some of the different zones designated, for that are highly trafficked with pedestrians and stuff, that, that all makes sense. And again, just to speak of a lifelong skateboarder of almost 30 years, like most people just want to do, if you're trying to get to and from for recreation or just for the purpose of transportation, you want to do what's easy and safe and works well for you. And, this is really designed, it seems like, to, and hopefully will serve not just like 40-year-old skateboarders like myself, but kids and families that take part in our camp and are just members of the community here. And, I think, and like lessening any, anything that prohibits them from doing that, and just like working on the language to explain that. And that's something through the camp and through the, downtown business of Push Skate Shop. Those are community conversations that we have and have been having for years. And we try and inform and educate people, how to do that safely and what is,
Caller, your
time is
now up.
Yeah. What's that?
I was just letting you know that the 3 minutes is now up. We will move on to our next.
Okay,
caller.
I didn't know I had the 3 minutes. Thank you. If you need any help or anything, just reach out, please. Thanks.
Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, thanks.
Caller ending in 6932, your line is now open and you will have 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah, hi. My name is Rob Seabrel. I'm a long-term downtown business owner, and I wanted to express my support for decriminalizing all forms of personal transportation on our roads, bike lanes, and greenways. And I've been sitting in on the meeting, and I really appreciate you guys voting this forward and to council. And I just wanted to call and yeah, express my support and say thank you.
Vice Mayor, that was our last caller.
Okay. Well, do we have any other questions or comments before we adjourn this evening? Okay, not. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.